I bet you know why it's so important for Latinos to understand Common Core Standard and the impact that it's going to have, not only for ELs, but for all Latino students and for the entire Latino community. Just briefly, I would like to mention that in LAUSD, particularly that, I focus on covering LAUSD for obvious reasons because I'm based in LA. And I just found out that over 160,000 students are considered ELs, and 93% of them have Spanish as their first language. So it is very important how their families and the entire community is going to support this type of students once the Common Core standards get in place.
So I'm actually going to be playing two roles. I will be framing the simulation, then we will jump into some simulation, then I'll explain gaps because, for the real simulation we need at least all day or at least a morning, but never mind, we don't have that. So it'll be slightly confusing in that sense. But I hope at the same time it'll be illuminating in terms of understanding what are some of the practices that we really want all of our English language learners and all of our other students involved in as they engage with Common Core standards. So the unit is a unit that focuses on persuasion. And the reason for persuasion is that as human beings, we are surrounded by persuasive texts. And not to speak of the times in which we're living now, right? With elections so close to us. But a good persuasive text is actually, first, a good argumentative text. And so we looked at persuasion across time and across space. For the simulation, your family has just had to move to Peru. And so you studied Spanish very fast, for one semester. And you can say, hola, ¿cómo estás? Qué bueno, I see. And, but your level is intermediate barely. Now you walk into your class, Historia del Perú, and what you're going to discuss is the controversy between Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín about the future of Latin America. So different countries have just gained their independence from Spain, and now there are two very different positions. And so you need to read these texts. And when we talked to students, they said, in these 4 weeks, 2 hours a day, we have learned more than in 4 years in the system. And so I think that's the bottom line. The bottom line is rigor pays. High challenge, when it is tied to high levels of support, is the only way to go with our students.
I assume that many of you are familiar with the name Lucy Calkins. She is a educator at Teachers College at Columbia University. And this quote from her is, if one looks at what students spend their time doing in school, it is very easy to project the skills that they will master. If students spend their time answering low-level literal questions, filling in blanks, and recalling facts, then that will be the kind of thinking they can do. And what is so inspiring about this whole movement for me as an educator and for the teachers that I work with is that this sort of flies in the face of the last 12 years of low-level literal questions. A lot of the work that I have done in San Francisco is around the math standards, which is, again, part of this movement. And in the case of the math standards, the big idea, the sort of framing idea, is that we have had an era with the second standards movement. We've had an era where our standards are an inch deep and a mile wide. Have you guys heard that phrase before? So that's a phrase that's out there. It's a very common phrase. And with all of the new standards, but in particular with the math standards, they took the banner of Singapore, which is teach less, learn more. So it looks like fewer standards, but what we are called to do with those fewer standards is have a more robust quality of discourse, which again, it points directly to the question of how will our English language learners access this content. My illustration from the math standards is that if you look at the standards adopted in California in '97, a first grader was asked to do a series of isolated skills. Those isolated skills included count, read, and write whole numbers to 100. Again, that's a skill. That's an isolated, finite thing that one can do, that one can demonstrate. Compare and order whole numbers to 100 by using the symbols for less than, equal to, or greater than. Those were things that we've been asking our first graders to do for years in California. Now, within the banner of understanding place value, what we are asked to do is to think about the fact that the numbers from 11 to 19 are composed of a 10 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 ones. So now what I'm doing is I'm thinking more deeply about the numbers in between 11 and 19. And I want to point that out as an important shift because it seems like the numbers are smaller. It seems like I'm doing less work. But in reality, if I'm thinking more deeply about place value, when I get to 5th grade and I have to think about thousandths, or I have to think about billions, I'm better equipped to understand place value and what that whole system is hanging on.